Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was 7 feet 2 inches tall, the most dominant college basketball player in America, and he was not impressed. He had come to meet a martial arts instructor named Bruce Lee, but when he arrived, it was not Bruce who demonstrated. It was Bruce's wife, Linda. She was not a martial arts champion. She was not particularly large, and when she finished, Kareem said the impact had rocked him backwards several feet and readjusted his spine. He signed up immediately, not because of Bruce Lee, because of the woman Bruce Lee had married. This is the story of the most unlikely friendship in the history of sport and what it built. To understand how Kareem Abdul-Jabbar ended up in Bruce Lee's living room in 1967, you first need to understand who each of them was at that specific moment. The answer, in both cases, is not yet who they would become. Kareem was 20 years old. He was a sophomore at UCLA, where he was already the most physically dominant college basketball player the sport had seen. Long, coordinated, able to score from positions that defenders could not reach, destined for a professional career that would produce 6 NBA MVP awards and more points than any player in the history of the league. But in 1967, he was a college student. He was not famous in the way he would become famous. He was known, anticipated, talked about, but the career that would define his legacy was still ahead of him. Bruce Lee was 26 years old. He had been in America for 8 years. He had opened martial arts schools in Seattle and Oakland, trained a devoted circle of students, and developed the philosophical framework that would eventually become Jeet Kune Do. He had appeared in the television series The Green Hornet, playing Kato, a role that gave him visibility in America, but not the kind of cultural centrality he was working toward. He was teaching private lessons in Los Angeles to a collection of actors, musicians, and athletes. He was not yet a film star. He had not yet made The Big Boss or Fist of Fury. Enter the Dragon was 6 years away. Neither man knew who the other was. Bruce was not following basketball. Kareem had not seen The Green Hornet. They existed in different worlds that had, through the specific coincidences of Los Angeles in 1967, been brought into proximity. The connection came through an editor at Black Belt magazine. Kareem had been looking to get back into martial arts training. He had studied a Japanese style briefly in New York before coming to UCLA, and he wanted to continue. He asked around. A friend connected him to someone who knew the editor, and the editor had a clear recommendation. Rather than returning to the Japanese tradition he had started with, he should meet a Chinese martial artist in Los Angeles who had created his own system, someone who did not fit any existing category, someone who had taken what he found valuable from Wing Chun and boxing and fencing and wrestling and built something new from it. Someone who was already teaching private lessons to some of the most interesting people in Los Angeles and who had a reputation among the people who had trained with him for changing how they understood what a human body could do.
Kareem was interested enough to make an appointment. He had, after all, enough experience with martial arts and with physical ability to calibrate what he was looking at. He knew what skill looked like. He was not easily fooled by performance. He showed up at Bruce Lee's house in Los Angeles, expecting to assess whether this was someone worth training with. He was ready to be somewhat impressed, cautiously and on probation. He was not ready to be transformed. Kareem greeted him with a broad smile and started talking about UCLA basketball. This was unexpected. Every martial arts instructor Kareem had encountered previously had led with formal ritual, the titles, the bowing, the elaborate hierarchical performance that communicated status before anything useful had been said or done. Bruce led with conversation. He was genuinely interested in basketball. He had opinions about it. He was funny and direct, and seemed entirely unconcerned with demonstrating his own importance. As Kareem later wrote in his autobiography, Becoming Kareem, he greeted me with a broad smile and friendly demeanor, and right away I knew this was not a scowling teacher from Japanese films demanding bowing obedience. We talked UCLA basketball for a while and then got down to business. Then Bruce turned to Linda. He asked his wife to demonstrate Jeet Kune Do for the visitor. Linda Lee had been training with Bruce since before they were married. She understood the system not as a bystander or spectator, but as a practitioner, someone who had absorbed the philosophy and the technique through years of direct instruction from the person who had created it. She was not presenting a simplified version for a newcomer. She was demonstrating what the system actually was. What she did to Kareem made him feel it in his spine. He described it afterward as an impact that rocked him backward several feet, not a staged fall, not a polite demonstration for the benefit of a potential student, but genuine force delivered by someone half his size who knew exactly where to direct it and how to generate it. The impact rocked me backward a few feet, readjusted my spine, he said. 7'2", 220 pounds, an athlete who had been training his body since childhood, who had developed one of the most physically sophisticated skill sets in the history of the game, rocked backward by a demonstration from his future teacher's wife. He signed up. What followed was a private training relationship that continued for years, one of the most unusual student-teacher pairings that any sport or martial art has produced. The physical asymmetry alone was remarkable. Bruce at 5'7" and 140 pounds, Kareem at 7'2" and 220 pounds. The conventional wisdom about fighting and physical ability suggested that these proportions should have made serious training between them nearly impossible, that the larger man's reach, weight, and leverage would overwhelm anything the smaller man could do. The conventional wisdom was wrong, as it tended to be when applied to Bruce Lee. What Bruce taught Kareem was not a set of techniques designed for someone Bruce's size. It was a philosophy of movement and adaptation that was size-independent, that worked precisely because it did not depend on matching the opponent's physical parameters. The centerline theory, the interception of force, the constant movement that denied an opponent a fixed target. These were principles that a 7'2" NBA center could apply as effectively as a 5'7" martial artist because they were principles rather than prescriptions. Kareem's size and strength in this framework were not obstacles to the system. They were advantages within it, once properly directed.
As Kareem later recalled, Bruce moved with such precision and intent. I had strength and range, but he had balance and speed. We learned from each other. This bidirectionality, the idea that the student was also a teacher, was central to how Bruce approached instruction. He did not have a fixed curriculum that he transmitted to students in a predetermined sequence. He adapted to each person, found what they brought, and worked with it rather than against it. Kareem brought a physical instrument that almost nobody else on earth possessed. Bruce found what was useful in that instrument and showed Kareem how to use it better. The training relationship expanded into something larger than martial arts technique. Both men were navigating the specific challenge of being exceptional in a world that wanted to reduce them to their category. Kareem as a black man in an America that was still working through the civil rights movement, in cities that were burning, in a sport that had recently integrated, but in a country that had not. Bruce as an Asian man in a Hollywood that refused to give him the leading roles his talent demanded. They talked about this. They talked about what it meant to remain authentic under pressure, to refuse to let circumstances rewrite your values, to be completely what you were in the face of systems that preferred you to be something smaller and more manageable. Circumstances should not change who you are, Kareem has said of what he learned from Bruce. It is not a martial arts principle in the narrow sense. It is a life principle that emerged from conversations between two young men who were each, in their own way, being asked to compromise what they were in exchange for access to what they wanted. The influence on Kareem's basketball career was also direct and specific. He has said that training with Bruce helped develop the durability and longevity that allowed him to play at the highest level for 20 seasons. The adaptability he learned from Jeet Kune Do, the principle of responding to what is actually in front of you rather than executing a pre-planned system regardless of conditions, translated into a basketball intelligence that allowed him to be effective against players of every size and style. The skyhook itself, the most unstoppable shot in the history of the game, was a perfect expression of the Jeet Kune Do principle. Find the angle that no one can reach and use it without apology.
The friendship led to film. When Bruce was developing Game of Death, the philosophical pagoda film in which his character would fight a different opponent on each level, each fight representing a different martial system and a different philosophical argument about adaptability, he knew immediately who he wanted for the final level, the highest floor, the most difficult fight, the opponent who would require everything his character had developed across the entire film to defeat. He called Kareem. He explained the concept and what the fight would need to represent. Kareem said yes. The fight they developed together was built entirely around the specific asymmetry between them, 7'2" against 5'7", reach and power against speed and positioning, the enormous physical advantages of size encountering a system specifically designed to neutralize exactly those advantages, to deny the opponent the space in which those advantages operated, to close distance and change angles and move in ways that made reach irrelevant and weight a liability rather than an asset. What Bruce did in the choreography was turn the fight into a demonstration of every principle he had been developing for 15 years. Every technique had a specific reason for being used in that position against that opponent. Every exchange was an argument. The sequence was Jeet Kune Do made visible in the most demanding possible context, against an opponent whose physical advantages made every other strategy inadequate. Kareem wore dark contact lenses for the sequence, playing a character with a sensitivity to light that required him to fight in near darkness. This detail further complicated Bruce's task and produced some of the most visually striking images in the footage. The collaboration on set was entirely comfortable. Two people who knew each other well, who had trained together for years, who could work without the friction that usually attended the choreography of violence between people of radically different physical capabilities. The result was approximately 11 minutes of fight footage that most serious analysts of martial arts cinema consider the most philosophically coherent, extended fight sequence Bruce Lee ever committed to film. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. He was 32 years old. Kareem was 25. The NBA career that would make him the greatest scorer in the league history was barely underway. He had just played his fourth professional season. The friendship that had begun in a living room in Los Angeles in 1967, that had started with a woman who rocked a 7'2" basketball player backward several feet, had lasted 6 years, and had produced a philosophy of adaptation and authenticity that Kareem carried into every subsequent year of his life. He has said that it was the first time he had lost someone that close. He has said that the loss made him determined to carry forward what Bruce had stood for. He has written about it in his autobiography, in essays, in a piece published on the 50th anniversary of Bruce's death in 2023. "I hope it captures my appreciation, admiration, and love," he wrote, reprinting the memoir excerpt about their friendship. The friendship between Bruce Lee and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is, on the surface, improbable, the most unusual pairing that any casual reading of their biographies would produce. A small Chinese-American martial artist and a giant Black American basketball player in Los Angeles in 1967, when neither was yet who they would become. It was made possible by a woman who was willing to demonstrate and an editor who made a phone call. It was sustained by two people who found in each other someone who understood what it meant to be extraordinary in a world that preferred you to be ordinary. Bruce Lee once said, "The key to immortality is first living a life worth remembering." Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has been remembering his life for 50 years, and the part he keeps coming back to, the part he has written about and talked about and quoted across half a century, begins with a woman rocking him backward in a living room in Los Angeles, changing his spine and changing everything.
If this story moved you, subscribe and leave a comment. Did you know it was Linda Lee who convinced Kareem to train with Bruce? Share this video with someone who thinks they know the full story of Bruce Lee's students, because the most important one stands 7 feet 2.